Following stories are that of Wendigo encounters, more stories coming from Native American lore. The Wendigo are very similar creatures to that of Skinwalkers, except they were created out of cannibalism and thirst for blood. They live to feed their hunger. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the horror. Number 1. This happened years and years ago. In fact, 7 years to the day. I live in a sleepy little town in Massachusetts, right on a cul-de-sac that had a little path that led down to the pond. It was a picturesque town, a perfect place to raise kids. Then there was the woods. All the kids in my neighborhood were used to wandering around the woods at the other end of the neighborhood. It was pretty much tradition. Whenever a new kid moved to the neighborhood, a bunch of us would show them all the best spots to climb trees and play. Then there were the woods across the street from me. Even during the day, this stretch of woods was silent. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. If you went about a mile down, all of a sudden, all the life seemed to come back, but nothing in my spot. My dog would go out of her way to avoid it, even refusing to cross the street and growling whenever I did. The kids came up with tons of urban legends explaining this. I remember the story of a zombie man that ate anything that came into his area. The reality of it was far worse. April 23rd, 2012 came around. A group of my friends had decided to spend the night at my house. Then we were all going to spend the next day at the pond down the road. We were having the time of our 13-year-old lives, playing video games and telling scary stories. It was about 10:30 when we decided on truth or dare. Everyone was picking truth when we first started. Then about halfway through, people started getting braver, mostly because we agreed on not giving any dares that could make us sick. We had people texting their crushes and flashing the neighbors. Then it was my turn. Not wanting to look like a wimp, I picked dare. Okay, go explore the woods for a half hour. I felt my heart stop. As soon as the words were out, my other friends were trying to make her change her dare, but I said no. I couldn't look like a wimp in front of all my friends. I was horrified, sure, but my 13-year-old brain figured nothing was worse than being embarrassed in front of my friends, so I agreed. I remember standing in front of the woods so vividly. My legs felt like lead, my flashlight was shaking, and my phone was non-stop vibrating with messages from my friends who were watching me from the safety of my room telling me to go for it. Eventually I did. The moment I took one step into the dense tree line, I wanted to turn back, but the timer was on. 30 minutes, just 30 minutes. I started wandering around. It was creepy, sure, but also strangely beautiful. There were so many trees perfect for climbing up. I could already picture myself sitting in one reading a good book. I was almost enjoying myself. 20 minutes left. Before I knew it, I climbed one of the trees and was just sitting and relaxing. It was nice. I couldn't wait to tell my friends how scared we were of nothing. 15 minutes left. It was at this point I heard some rustling nearby getting closer to me. Cool. I thought maybe I'll see a coyote or something. I turn off my flashlight. Now the moon is illuminating the forest. It's still pretty easy to see. 10 minutes left. That's when I saw it. It was tall, easily 7 feet. It was walking on two legs and growling. It almost looked like a person. No. No, a living human being couldn't look like that. It was skeletal, with sunken in black eyes that didn't blink once in that time. I looked at it. Its mouth was large with rows of pointed teeth and pale white skin stretched tightly over the bones that seemingly jetted out from every angle. It looked like it was covered in blood. It took everything in me for me not to cry out. Instead, I pulled my legs up into the tree and watched it get closer and closer to me before it stopped directly under the tree I was in. My breath hitched and I retreated as far back as I could, holding my hand over my mouth and doing anything not to scream. It stood there beneath me for what felt like an eternity, not moving, just breathing heavily. Then eventually it growled and scurried off into the tree line. I let out a breath I didn't even know I was holding in, and slowly lowered myself from the tree. And that's when it happened. As soon as my feet touched the ground, the alarm signaling the end of my 30 minutes went off loudly. I rushed to turn it off and froze, praying it hadn't heard, until I heard an ear-piercing screech in the direction it had run off to, then rustling coming directly at me, fast. I didn't even think, just ran in the direction I had come from, not even bothering to look behind me. But I knew it was right there. I could hear it gaining on me, feel its breath on my back. It had to have been running on all fours by the pattern in the footsteps, not that I really had time to care. I saw the lights to my house through the trees and put all the energy I had into that final dash where I broke through. It was at that moment that my foot got caught on something, a root probably, and I face planted it. I finally gathered the courage to scream and roll over. That's when I saw it close up, standing on two legs about 2 feet away from me. It had stopped directly at the tree line, almost as though it couldn't go any further. It growled at me and then turned back and dashed into the woods. At that point, I ran back inside and I told my friends everything. Of course, they didn't believe me. They thought I was just trying to scare them. I moved 2 years later, but for those 2 years, every time I passed those woods, I could feel the eyes on me. I knew it was biding its time, waiting until I was dumb enough to get close to the woods again. I would feel it watching my house sometimes, and as our moving van pulled away, I swear I saw it watching us go. I'd hate to know what would have happened if it got me. Number 2. I'm a detective, which should be exciting, I know, but at least for me it was pretty boring. I was always sent to deal with the small scales kind of stuff. Break-ins, shoplifters, with the occasional somewhat serious kind of investigation like hit and run. But it was overall pretty simple stuff, that was with the exception of one incident. We were called up to investigate near an old Indian reservation. When we got to the scene, it was pretty fucking gruesome. There's a body found in the middle of the woods by a park ranger. His chest had been torn open and all his entrails removed, bone and all. Not even a drop of blood was left in the now gaping hole of a man. With some investigation, as well as an autopsy, it was chalked up to nothing more than a particularly brutal bear attack. As we were taking care of the body while in the woods, though, I felt the air suddenly turn cold, and the feeling of something or someone watching us from the distance. A week later, I returned to the scene. Something about it being a bear attack just didn't sit right with me. Sure, they're rather large animals, with a pretty mean bite, but to completely remove everything within somebody's body is not the normal behavior of any kind of animal. As I pondered this, I was found by an old Native American man. He scared the crap out of me when he approached me from out of nowhere. "Don't think it was really a bear, do you, son?" he asked. "Well, no, I just can't wrap my mind about what it could have been," I responded. The man let out a large puff of smoke from his old wooden pipe before looking back at me. "You ever hear of a Wendigo, son?" he asked. My long pause and completely oblivious face answered his question as he slowly walked himself to an old wooden log and took a seat. "You see, it's an old Algonquian legend. It's said that if one is to resort to cannibalism, they become the beast." I let out a small chuckle as I listened to the tall tale. "Well, sir, if there were any cannibals living in these woods, I'm sure I'd know about it." He nodded and let out another cloud of smoke before moving his pipe. "No, no, not from any time recently. Once before the Revolutionary War, there was quite a savage tribe of natives that lived on this land. The story goes that their chief had manifested into the Wendigo when he ate a man who came to their land in search of trade," he said before slowly picking himself off the log, wishing me goodbye and leaving. Now I know it sounds crazy, but while I mostly thought the man was just trying to scare me, there was a small part of me that believed the story. I just couldn't bring myself to believe that a bear, or even a person for that matter, could completely scoop a man's internals clean out without showing any signs of struggle or other wounds on the victim. I decided I'd do a little investigating of my own, and sure enough there's a pretty good amount of Wendigo sightings within that old reservation. There was even a museum that claimed to have genuine Wendigo's horns. I don't know why I was so invested with this Wendigo legend, but there was something about it that made me believe it was real, so I decided to do something pretty stupid. I returned to the woods at night, nothing but a flashlight and a sidearm. It was pretty boring to be quite honest, but about an hour and a half in, I was beginning to question my sanity for thinking something so ridiculous. Then I heard it, a loud deep groan from in the woods, nothing that a human could make. I slowly approached it and came across a putrid smell of rotting meat and dead flies. I turned on my flashlight, and what I saw made me puke. A pile of corpses, some human, some not, all of which had similar wounds to the man we found a week ago. Some of them were even missing person cases that we'd received a long time ago. Then I heard the groan again. It was closer and coming from behind me. I quickly spun around and pointed my gun and light in front of me, and then I saw it, the Wendigo. A tall, extremely skinny creature, some of its bones even poked through the skin, and its ribcage was almost completely visible. Long, sharp claws, and the head of a rotting deer, and a deep glowing yellow eye. I was frozen in fear till it let out an ear-piercing screech and began to charge me. I fired 2 rounds at it, which temporarily halted the creature, giving me enough time to run past it and make a break for the woods. But it got up so fast and began to resume chasing me even faster. I fired blindly at it until my magazine was emptied, luckily hitting it enough times to stall it enough for my escape. As I stumbled out of the woods back onto the regular park grounds, I slowly stood up and looked back at it. It went across the tree line. I saw its glowing yellow eyes staring me down before slowly turning around and returning to its home in the deep, dark woods. Once it disappeared from my sight, I quickly dropped to my knees and began to vomit for a solid 5 minutes. The next morning, I reported the bodies I had found in the woods. I left out my run-in with the creature, however. Hell, it's not like anyone would have believed me, even if I did tell them what I saw. When they found the bodies, they came to the conclusion that they were now looking for a serial killer. Even found a guy who was wanted for committing some pretty similar acts as to what happened to the victims in the woods. I even got a promotion out of it. The only downside is, now no matter where I go, how far, if there's any kind of forest or woods nearby, I can see it. I can see its glowing yellow eyes peering through the tree line. It's been almost a year and a half since I've seen that creature, and still, the Wendigo watches. Number 3. First things first. This happened to me when I was around 10. I lived in Idaho all my life and spent a lot of my time outside or in the wilderness as a kid. My grandparents would take me camping, and my older brother and I would always hike up whatever trails we could find to get a view of the sunset. On one of these occasions, something terrifying happened. We were up at a campsite I only know as Warm River, and my brother and I were on a regular evening hike. There was an old tunnel bored through the mountain at one part of the trail, probably an old train tunnel, and we were walking through it when I heard something that I'll never forget. After walking through probably 2/3 of the way of the tunnel, I heard a terrible screech at the end where we entered. The screech wasn't like anything I've heard before. I've heard the screams of animals on dark and windy nights. I even think I've heard Bigfoot calls a few times, but never the metallic, grinding screech I heard that day. The point is, whatever the sound was, it did not sound natural in any capacity. I probably jumped 5 feet in the air when I heard it, and my brother shouted a few choice curses before shooing me quickly to the exit of the tunnel. At this point, my brother decided we should continue walking and head back after whatever made that noise hopefully cleared out. We didn't have any firearms on us, so I was pretty upset. My brother reassured me we would be fine. We made the walk back without incident. However, I didn't get any sleep that night. Whether it was the thing that screeched at us, or just my imagination, I heard things moving around the campsite the whole night, as well as whispers echoing through the darkness outside the trailer. I woke my brother up a few times to check out what it was, but he refused each time, telling me that it was probably just other campers staying up late enjoying themselves. The rest of the trip was pretty normal. We packed up the following day and my life continued as normal. I was unhappy but chalked what happened up as a harmless event that I must have been exaggerating in retrospect. A few weeks later, I went up to Pine Basin, an old ski lodge my family rented each year for family reunions. Here I would mess around with my cousins, our favorite activity being night games. We would play hide and seek, a game called Ghost in the Graveyard, or other games like that. On one instance, I had chosen to be the seeker for a hide and seek game. Because I was one of the younger cousins, I got a flashlight as an advantage. Normally all the younger cousins hid close to the lodge and the other cousins hid nearby the trees or the base of the mountain. As I was searching near the base of the mountain, I heard a familiar whistle up the mountain a bit. It sounded like someone was hiding way up near a tree known as the underwear tree, so I began trekking up towards the whistle. As I climbed closer, I got an uneasy feeling in my stomach. I continued on wearily and convinced myself that I would be fine. I hated walking in the night alone, but figured whoever I find would walk back with me to the lodge. As I neared the tree, I noticed that it was deathly silent. This alerted me that something was very wrong, because you could always hear adults having fun back at the lodge. I was anxious to hurry back, so I called out, "I found you, Scott. Come down with me." I got no reply, but I wasn't planning on waiting. As I began walking back down the path, I heard a voice call, "You almost had me," so I ran back to investigate. I flashed my light in the branches of the trees and saw a monstrosity that was not my cousin. It looked like a poorly drawn stick figure made into human with its emaciated figures and lifeless eyes. I remember his face looked like the skin on his head was being pulled from behind. It had torn and stretched features. As soon as I saw the creature, I screamed, dropped the flashlight, and ran back to the lodge. The entire time I was running, I was overcome by an overpowering smell, and I could hear the thing running after me. As I approached the camp, I saw a few people at the bottom of the mountain waiting for me. I was crying and shaking, and they took me inside. I told my dad what happened, but my cousins all said they didn't see anything following me. The adults kept us inside for the night, and I kept hearing sounds drifting in from the mountains. I never played night games after that happened, and was always terrified that my cousins wouldn't listen to my warnings. Ever since that night, I felt uneasy up in the mountains. I used to be really religious, and I figured it was a demon of some kind trying to kill me, something like that. But those mountains have never felt the same after that incident. A few years ago, the game Until Dawn became very popular, and I watched a walkthrough of it on YouTube. When the Wendigo first appeared in the game, I got chills down my spine. It was exactly what I saw, and I did a ton of research on them. I figured someone must have gotten snowed in at that old lodge and resorted to cannibalism, but that doesn't explain what happened at Warm River. I still hear that screech from time to time, and it scares the hell out of me every time. I heard it earlier tonight, and that's why I decided to finally write my story down. Number 4. I'm not sure if this is the right place to post this, but I'm scared shitless. After hearing stories and looking stuff up online, I'm fairly sure I encountered a Wendigo. Me, my son, and my girlfriend were attacked by something. We were camping up in the northernmost area of Washington. My girlfriend is incredibly superstitious, so she insisted we brought some weapons. So I had my combat knife, a 12-gauge shotgun. She brought a .22 rifle alongside with a newly sharpened machete. Our son was just 3 years old at the time. She and I were set on edge from a park ranger who stopped us and insisted on confiscating all of our weapons and told us to be careful and stay safe, then sent us on our way to the camp. When we got there, we were informed that several visitors had spoken about some unnatural noises and a pale creature that would mimic voices and sounds of people who weren't even talking or seeming to be distracted. I laughed and put the idea out of my mind, thinking to myself, there's no way, they're just screwing with us, but I knew better. So, then we reached the area we were going to set up camp. We immediately got a fire ready to light and set up our tents and bags. I fed my son as my girlfriend ate a snack. We decided to get a lay of the area, so me and my girlfriend hiked around for about an hour or so. Everything seemed normal until I saw something down the almost path we were on. We walked closer to investigate and saw drag marks. It looked as if someone had killed a buck, but there was a whole outline in the dirt with a small dried pool of blood, as if someone grabbed it from the antlers and pulled. That wouldn't be possible for any man to do. The buck, or whatever it was, would have been too big for that. Shaken, we rushed back to base camp and restarted the fire and hurried back to our tent. Too afraid to leave since it was dusk by now, and we stayed inside the tent and my girlfriend put our son to bed. Eventually, probably from exhaustion or fright, we fell asleep. What must have been hours later, I woke up to a faint rasping sound that sounded like a young child crying. I gazed outside in confusion and saw the outline of a creature that seemed to be a buck standing over something. It seemed to be about 20 feet away, but at a closer glance it had unnaturally long limbs for a buck and was eerily tall. In sudden fear, I unloaded 2 shots into the creature and heard a loud blood-curdling cry. My girlfriend woke up screaming to the shots I fired as I tried to explain what I heard. To my surprise, the animal hadn't moved an inch. Then I noticed the stains on the side of the animal. It looked like blood was running down the edge, and lots of it. It stared at me deep in my eyes as I became petrified with fear. A sinister feeling of dread fell over me as I knew I couldn't move. I thought to myself, what if it starts to bolt towards us? Just then, this tall, decrepit, demonic thing seemed to whisper something. I couldn't tell exactly what it was saying, but it seemed to have said, I need more children. My girlfriend screamed, asking where our son was. We blacked out. In the morning, we awoke the park rangers at our campsite. We didn't see our son anywhere. We told the rangers that he was missing and they started a search party. I explained what had happened, and strangely they seemed to believe it. The one who seemed to be older by at least a decade pulled along the one we met earlier and whispered in his ear. I only heard a single line, and I'm not even sure what I heard is correct. It sounded like he said, it's getting bolder. They didn't seem to want us by ourselves, so they waited with us while they continued to search. We stayed in a log cabin for 3 days with the forest ranger, when suddenly some rangers came into the cabin saying they couldn't find our son. My girlfriend starts to sob. I start to hate myself, thinking I could have done something if I wasn't frozen in fear. We rushed outside only to find some injured and frightened police officers. The rangers wouldn't tell us anything of what happened or what they saw, or why the cop was scared shitless. All we know is that we don't have our son anymore. God help whoever goes in that forest next. Please, just don't bring your kids with you. The previous stories have made you think. When you were in the woods, did you hear leaves rustling or twigs breaking? Did you get a chill down your spine? Maybe you've had your own Wendigo encounter and haven't even noticed. So next time you're in the woods, keep your eyes open. So then you can have your own encounter stories with these bloodthirsty, flesh-hungry creatures that stalk the woods and stalk their prey.